The year 2064 is projected to be the first year in centuries when fewer babies are born than people die. By then, birth rates in India will fall below the level seen in America last year. Despite immigration and successful pronatal policies, America's population growth will slow significantly, and by 2100, there will be fewer migrants left to attract. The global fertility rate is expected to drop to 1.7, with only 2 Pacific islands and 4 African countries reproducing above replacement level. Every major economy will eventually face a demographic decline, leading to increased fiscal pressures from pensions and healthcare. Economic growth could collapse, and public debt might surge unless policymakers maintain budgetary discipline and withstand pressure from older voters to inflict short-term pain for long-term gain. America and Europe have more time to prepare than East Asia, which is already feeling the strain. South Korea's population has started to decline and will continue to do so for decades. By 2036, twice as many Koreans will be over 65 as under 18, and China will reach a similar point by 2040, with America following by 2100. Rich countries are expected to spend 21% of their GDP annually on the elderly by 2050, up from 16% in 2015, according to the IMF. A quarter of this spending will go toward pensions, with the rest for health and social care. Although AI and pharmaceutical advances might reduce the budget, historical trends suggest they could increase it. The demographic impact depends on the speed of population aging and societal expectations from the state. South Korea, with its modest 55% debt to GDP ratio, faces long-term unsustainability despite struggling to reduce its deficit below 3%. Nearly 40% of South Korea's elderly live in poverty, the highest rate in the OECD. In contrast, China faces severe pressure with 100 million pensioners by 2050, all promise a basic state pension. Currently, 1/3 of local pension providers are running deficits, and the central government's pension fund is expected to run dry by 2035 without intervention. Europe and America face similar risks due to their generous pension systems, albeit at a later date. Economic adaptation to an aging population will influence the impact. Government borrowing sustainability reflects the gap between stable inflation interest rates, neutral rate, and economic growth, which boosts tax receipts. Older workers tend to be less productive, and a shrinking population could hinder growth requiring new ideas. Stanford University's Charles Jones models a scenario where fewer people generate fewer innovations, slowing the growth of the total stock of ideas, stalling economic growth, and living standards. Interest rates' future impact on debt-to-GDP ratios is uncertain. Some economists expect the neutral rate to track economic growth, driven by more retirees saving and fewer young entrepreneurs investing. However, Charles Goodhart and Manoj Pradhan argue that increased spending by elderly consumers, fueled by government handouts, could drive up the neutral rate. This would force governments to inflate away their debts. Western governments can mitigate the demographic impact through credible monetary policy to reassure investors and by reining in deficits in anticipation of future challenges. Pensions will need to be reduced, and retirement ages raised by 5 years by the end of the century, according to the IMF. Such reforms will be unpopular now and nearly impossible later when the elderly have more voting power. Politicians must act promptly, as seen with French President Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reform proposals, which sparked widespread protests.